is I've taught homeschool students like Skyler over the past 20, 22 years on American history, world history, and American government economics. And that's what I enjoy doing most, is teaching. And so when Skyler approached me, I was honored and very appreciative of the fact to get a chance to talk with all of you. Now, I could talk to you for hours, but what I'm going to try and do is give you a very capsulated view of how Christianity came to influence America and why I think of America as a Christian nation, not formally, but as a nation that was founded on a Christian worldview. And so if we're ready, I can start. I'm going to go about 20, 25 minutes. It's tough for me to do that because I'm like a radio guy, put a microphone in front of me, I talk forever. And then we'll open maybe some questions and discussion among all of you. So America was founded by Europeans. There were indigenous peoples on this continent, but the Europeans through exploration came to the Americas, the Spanish, the French, and the English, and they settled here and grew here. Christianity was the predominant religion of Europe through the actions of the early Christian church. The Roman Empire controlled that area, and the early Christians sent out apostles and to preach throughout the empire. They were protected by Roman law. They were persecuted by Roman law as well, but they spread throughout the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire became the West. Even after the fall of Rome, Christianity prospered because when it was no longer the Roman government and belief in Roman gods that kept society together, Christianity kept Europe together and kept parts of Africa together as European nations. And it was the Christian church, and there was only one church at the time, the Catholic Church. There was no Protestantism yet. Then the Catholic Church split in 1054 between the Eastern Catholics, that became Byzantium, the Byzantine Empire, and then Western Europe. Then you had the Reformation, which came in the 14 and 1500s when people saw corruption in the church. People they thought the church going astray. But that's a typical Christian belief because Christians believe that man is flawed. Men are sinners. People are sinners. They are not perfect, and they will fail without the help of God. And that's why Jesus came to here, as Christians teach, to save all of us from our sins. So the fact that the church got corrupt and started becoming more human and falling away from God is a human characteristic in the Christian worldview. That religious split affected England significantly. They had a war between the Catholics and the Protestants. The Protestants took over England and formed the Church of England. King Henry VIII formed his own church, and the Church of England became the church. And within that church, there were dissenters like Lutherans and others. They were also persecuted because the Church of England was the established church. This is the way to believe, and it was tied in with the government. Now, here in North America, Canada was settled by the French, who were Catholic. South America settled by the Spanish, who were Catholic. But the strip of land along the eastern seaboard was settled by the English, who were Protestant. And many of them were fleeing the religious persecution of the Church of England, the Pilgrims, the Separatists, Methodists, whoever was not a member of the Church of England. They came to America so they could freely worship their religion without any type of opposition or persecution by the government. So many of the people who first came here brought their separate religious beliefs, all Protestant, that came here. And religious freedom was one of the 2 or 3 top reasons to come to America. Another reason was land. There was plenty of land here. The indigenous peoples, they actually were fairly small in number. A lot of land here. There were some wars fought, but land was important because we were an agricultural society. And so if you're a farmer, land is important. 10 acres is more than 1 acre. 100 acres is more than 10. And so people could come here and start their own farms, start their own agricultural, and get rich. In Europe, they'd had a system for 1,000 years. There wasn't much land left that didn't belong to someone. So the desire for land brought people here. Desire for religious freedom brought people here. And the desire to start over. Because many people had failed in England. There were people in poverty, and there were people in debt. And they would come here as indentured servants. You could have someone pay your way if you agreed to work for them for 7 years here in America, and then they would let you go. So you had the settlement occurring here from mostly the British, a few other people, but they were overwhelmingly Protestant. And so they didn't necessarily all go to church, but the Bible was the most common book found in an American household, and they had a Christian worldview. And I would define that as a belief that man is imperfect. We'll never have utopia on this planet. Man just can't, they're flawed. They can't come up with that. And because of that, you need government to be small and controlled. They believed in sin and thought that the rule of law was to provide order here. And they looked at it as God is the source of our liberties. That if we are free people, we're not free just because we're born or just because we're here or the king gives us our freedom, that God is the source of our liberties. And so the people who came to America overwhelmingly had that worldview. And they might have had different religious viewpoints, Methodist, Lutheran, Pilgrims, Separatists, Congregationalists, but they were Protestants and they were Christians almost overwhelmingly. And what happened here in America, because England was 3,000 miles away. England, it took 6 weeks to get here from by sail, by ship. So if the king made a decision, it took 6 weeks for us to find out about it. Then if we reacted adversely, debated and decided we didn't like it, a couple weeks there, then it took another 6 weeks for the king to find out we didn't like it. And so there was a sense of separation here in America from England. Even though we were a British colony, we were owned by the British. We had to trade only with the British. American businessmen could not sell furniture to France or shoes to Holland. Everything had to go through England because we were a British colony. And the American people got somewhat upset over that because over time we became our own people because Britain was so far away. The British government had little to say here. If you weren't involved in trading, you probably never saw a British official, a British soldier. Nobody wanted to come to America. This was the frontier. England was where civilization was. And so oftentimes the best and the brightest didn't come to America, and the British weren't here. And so we developed two habits. We elected our own legislature. Every colony had a legislature. And we elected our own people. Virginia elected Virginians, and New Yorkers elected New Yorkers to run our colonies. The king appointed the governor, but the legislature had the power. And when it came to church, and this is really important, the established church in England never sent an archbishop here to run the church. So all the churches in America developed their own independent identity. Americans elected their pastors. They called for their pastors. Now in the Catholic Church, pastors or priests typically assigned. And in the Church of England, they were assigned. But here, because Catholics were small in number, and because the Church of England never sent an archbishop, we elected our own pastors, starting in 1619, 1620. So when you look at the time up to the end of the Revolution, for 150 years, we Americans elected our own leadership. We got used to that. It became a habit, and it was rare in the world for that to happen. So over time, as America grew and we grew prosperous, we were very lightly taxed. Americans paid almost no taxes, but we also shouldered the burden of defending our frontiers against the Indians, against the French, and against the Spanish. And so we developed a very independent streak, but always centered on the idea of Christianity, religion be a central point in our life, and the freedom to go to church. When we fought the French and Indian Wars in 1755 to 1763, the British came to help us. There was really a world war. The British and the French fought everywhere, but they fought in the Philippines, they fought in South America, they fought in Africa, they fought in India. But here, it was known as the French and Indian Wars because it was the French and Indians against the British and the Americans. And the British spent a lot of money. They eventually won the war, but they were heavily in debt. And they thought, well, we fought the war in America to help the Americans. Let's tax the Americans because we have to make up this deficit. Well, the Americans didn't like that idea because the Americans said, look, our villages were burned. We did most of the fighting. It was our women that were killed. Our children were killed. All that was true. And then they also said, and we should have a say in who taxes us. We have no say in Britain. And it's important to understand that this revolution was about taxation without representation. And that got back to the idea that we're sovereign individuals under God. We have certain rights that God gave us, and that government should not oppress us or take from us without our permission. And they traced that idea all the way back to Magna Carta, when the barons rebelled against the king and said, you're asking for too much money, you should have to ask our permission before you tax us. And so our founding fathers said, well, look at yourself, England. Back in the 1200s, you said no taxation without representation. And the British said, you're represented. You're represented because you're British subjects, and only British subjects are elected in Parliament. That you don't have a vote doesn't mean that you're not represented. Well, this caused a furious reaction among Americans, and particularly in the churches, especially in New England and Middle America. As America settled, the Anglican Church, the Church of England, became predominant in the South, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina. But Maryland, Pennsylvania, New York, New England was really Protestant country, not Church of England. And if you go back and read the sermons of all these men, all these ministers, you see over and over again referrals to rebellion and tyrants. I have this book called They Preached Liberty, which is a great book because it goes back to the sermons of the pastors in the churches in the 1700s and what they had to say. A sermon in 1768 by a pastor in Massachusetts. Life, liberty, and property are the gifts of the Creator. Then again, in 1768, different pastor in Massachusetts. God never gives men up to be slaves till they lose their national virtue and abandon themselves to slavery. And this is a message that was preached over and over again in the pulpits in England, in New England, in the 1760s, as England tried to start taxing us. They taxed us with the Stamp Act, where every piece of paper in America, every piece of paper, marriage license, business license, newspaper, everything had to have a tax stamp. And that tax was to pay for the war. Well, Americans rebelled. We tarred and feathered tax collectors. We burned their homes. We scared them away. We boycotted British goods. We didn't buy anything from Britain. So the English gave in. The British said, okay, all right, we're not going to put the tax on a stamp on your papers. But, they said, we also we believe we have the right to tax you whenever we want. So you win this battle, but you don't win the war. So during the 1760s, repeatedly, the British government put taxes on American things, on imports from Britain, trying to raise this money. And Americans rebelled because they believed, based on the Bible and based on their Christian beliefs, that they were individual sovereign, that we were sovereign under God, we had rights that no government could take away. And for the government to tax us without asking our permission, for the government to be arbitrary and capricious, was unchristian. It was against our beliefs. We had certain beliefs in things like trial by jury, and that we had the right to be tried by our peers, that these were God-given rights. And the British tried to take some of these away during the prelude up to the Revolution, and Americans rebelled. And then continuously, Americans called for days of prayer and fasting. Our governors, our legislators would declare a day of prayer and fasting as the tension grew and the struggle grew, the conflict grew. You had the Boston Massacre in 1770. You had the Boston Tea Party in 1773, where Britain passed a law that said you have to buy tea from the East India Tea Company. Americans could not buy tea from anywhere. They couldn't buy tea from Holland or France or Spain or South America. They had to buy tea because the British Tea Company is going broke. And so the British said, well, the solution is we make Americans only drink tea, because tea was the drink of the time. Coffee was not as big. Tea was the big drink. But they also lowered the price. And so they said, you have to buy tea from us, but it's going to be cheaper. Well, Americans rebel at that kind of thing, being told what to do. And even though it was cheaper, the fact they were told they had to buy from England, they rebelled. And in 1773, they seized a ship that the British had shipped tea into America in Boston Harbor, and they dumped 342 chests of tea into the ocean, into the bay. Well, the British clamped down. They sent troops. They said, you have to tell us who did this. You have to tell us who the criminals were. They were dressed up as Mohawk Indians, and so no one knew who they were. They closed down the harbor. They allowed no ships in or out of Boston Harbor. Unemployment went through the roof. There was a recession. And Congress came together, the First Continental Congress. What do we do? They opened the session in prayer. They declared days of Thanksgiving and preparation and fasting throughout the colonies to show support for the colonists in Boston, because they felt the British government had overreacted. Well, this all leads up eventually to the Declaration of Independence. We go to war, and we decide we're going to declare independence when the British won't budge on any of these issues. And so we write the Declaration of Independence. And this is a very important document, because this is really, I think, the soul of America. We talk about the Constitution a lot, but the Constitution is like a blueprint for a building. The Declaration of Independence is the mission statement. The Constitution shows how to build the church, but the Declaration shows why we build the church. And God is mentioned 4 times in the Declaration. And when you look at how he's mentioned, all 4 times you add them together, it equals Jesus Christ. There's no other God in any other religion that defines this. God's mentioned 4 times. In the beginning, there's mention of an appeal to nature, the laws of nature, and nature's God. So God is a lawmaker. He's a lawgiver. There's mention of the Creator, that our rights are bestowed upon us by our Creator. We hold these truths, which is an important word in my mind. We hold these truths, not opinions, but truths. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. So we have God, the Creator, that they're bestowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Our rights come from God. They don't come from the state. They don't come from the king. They don't come from nature. God gives us our rights when he creates us. So we have God, the lawmaker. We have God, the Creator, and bestow of our rights. Then it goes on at the end of the Declaration to appeal to the supreme judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions. The supreme judge of the world. Well, that's God, Jesus. Jesus will come back in Christian belief to judge the world. And then they also pray for the protection of divine providence, which is a 1776 word for God. So it's God the protector, God the judge, God the lawgiver, God the creator. And those 4 elements of God are what we find in the Christian religion of Jesus Christ. So these men had this Christian worldview. Now, not every founder was an Orthodox Christian. Not every founder went to church. Not every founder would be a devout Christian. But they had that worldview of the world and what was important and how it was founded and how people worked. It was founded on this Christian belief. And you go through most of the revolutionary writings of the time, and you'll find these just crystal clear that this worldview was Christian. And this was the influence of the founding of the country. And it was a belief that, again, started back in the Holy Land 1,800 years before, but it came here, and the educated men were Christians. In Virginia, for instance, Virginia declared independence before America did. I don't know if y'all knew that, but this could be a good, double jeopardy question or whatever. But America declared independence on July 2nd. Virginia, as a colony, declared independence on May 15th. And of the 100 men who were at that convention that declared independence, 97 of them were elders in their church. 97 of 100 were elders in their church. And it goes on, and throughout, as each colony declared independence, their declarations of independence talk about God-given rights and about how the British are stepping on them. And we have to declare independence now, how wrong tyranny is. A lot of references to tyranny, a lot of references to the Old Testament and the kings of the Old Testament, the ones that were overthrown, the evil ones. If you go back and read through the debates on the Declaration and the Constitution, these men were very literate about Roman history, Greek history, and biblical history. And these are constant references to these things throughout the writings of the founders. Then we get to the Constitution. I just want to mention this before I wrap up, because this is a point of contention that is raised by many people who question the Christian worldview of the founders and whether or not this is a Christian nation. And by the way, when I say Christian nation, I don't mean the nation was founded so that all of you had to be Christian to be American. Exactly the opposite. I think it's a Christian nation because the men who founded it and this very unique system we have had a Christian worldview. Some of them weren't that orthodox. Some of them weren't that devout. And I don't think America was founded by Christians for Christians. I think America was founded for everyone who wanted to come and be free. And that's one of the unique things about this country when we talk about American exceptionalism, is that it doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter your ethnicity, your nation of origin. It doesn't matter your religion. You can come to America. And if you accept some fundamental beliefs about this country, you can be an American. There is no other country I'm aware of in the world that is as mixed, if you will, as we are, by people who come from other countries, other continents to become American. And that's what the founders intended. And it's part of this universal view that also is a Christian view, by the way. Jesus, the Christian church doesn't care who you are. They want you to accept Jesus. And there are different definitions, okay? You've got the Lutherans, the Catholics, the Church of Christ, I understand that. But the fundamental truth of the Christian religion, a universal truth, is that Christ came from everyone. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, Paul writes in Romans. And Christ is for everyone. There is no one who does not need Jesus and salvation in the Christian faith. Well, likewise, America is a universal religion, if you will. It doesn't matter where you're from. We don't say you can't come here. If you want to come here and be productive and accept America's way of life, then you're welcome. So I think there's certain parallels here between the universal faith and the universal approach that America had. And over the years, look, there have been a lot of problems. So remember, there are always problems because men are imperfect. Men are sinners. And so you're going to have mistakes. You're going to have stupid laws. You're going to have regulations. You're going to have government doing things they shouldn't do. But it's the dream of America and the founding belief of America in this universalism that I think parallels Christianity. That's important. One last quick thing on the Constitution. Many people say the Constitution requires separation of church and state. It does not do that. The phrase separation of church and state is nowhere in the Constitution. It is a phrase used by Thomas Jefferson in a letter to a group of Baptists in Connecticut who had written to him asking for their help, because in the early days in America, there were established churches in 9 of the 13 colonies. What established means is you're free to go where you want to go to church, but you have to pay a tax for the established church. Like if you're in Virginia, if you're a Lutheran or Church of Christ or Catholic, you go to where you want, but you had to pay a tax that went to the Anglican Church because the Anglican Church was established. It had legal protection and legal status. In Massachusetts, it was the Congregational Church. In Connecticut, Congregational Church. And these Baptists got upset and wrote President Jefferson and said, we're tired of paying taxes for those darn Congregationalists. We're Baptists. And they thought Jefferson would be friendly to them. And they sent Jefferson a 25-pound wheel of cheese. Okay, they sent as a present when he was elected. They had this wagon bring this wheel of cheese to the White House. They actually delivered it to him at the White House. In those days, there were no guards in the White House. The president answered the front door when you knocked. And they actually delivered this 25-pound wheel of cheese to the president and a letter that said, Mr. President, can you help us? We're tired of paying taxes to support the Congregationalists. Jefferson wrote back a letter that said, our founders were wise in establishing a separation of church and state on the federal level, which means no Church of America, like there was a Church of England. No one denomination would ever be the church in America where every American had to pay a tax for it. But he went on to say in the letter, if you read the whole letter, that the states are free to do what they want. My reading of the Constitution is the states can set up an established church, just the national government can't. So I sympathize with you. But you have to work through the system to change this. That's been distorted by many people, that one phrase in that letter, to mean that there's no place for church or religion in the public square in America. And it just is not true. What Jefferson was warning against and others, that there'd be no church, like there was Church of England, or in France, the Catholic Church was the church, that we would never have a national church, a denomination that could tell you as a Lutheran or a Catholic or a Church of Christ or Baptist, you had to pay a tax to a church you didn't belong to. And that's what Jefferson was talking about. That phrase has been distorted over time because the founders were not against religion in the public square. They were religious themselves. They practiced their faith. Their faith impacted what they did. They just didn't want one church in charge of the entire nation taxing you. So I'm past my time, and I could probably keep going on this because it's one of my favorite subjects. But I hope I gave you a sliver, a scene into the influence Christianity had on this country, and why I would say it's a Christian nation. Again, not founded by Christians for Christians, but founded by people who share a worldview, which is alien from many other worldviews. And Christianity has somewhat a unique worldview when it comes to people's relationship with God. It's different from other faiths, but it's that view of God our creator, God our lawgiver, God the source of our rights, God our protector, and God our judge that really shaped this country in a way that I don't think it shaped any other nation. So I hope that's giving you an idea of some of the influence of Christianity on America.
Thank you so much, Kirby.
If you have any questions, I'm more than happy, and I'll just stick around for the conversation for a while if I can.
Okay. I think it's a miracle because I noticed you described the huge division between the Protestants and the Catholic, and the fact that in it's written during the Declaration of Independence, it claimed that there's only one God, but all at the same time America allows other religions, people who are atheists, to join and share this equal sort of the kind of right given by people. I feel that that type of inclusiveness is very admirable comparing to some of the other religions.
Anyway, I'd mention one other thing in the Constitution. It says there should be no religious tests. Now, in some of the colonies, some of the states, there were religious tests. In New Hampshire, if you wanted to run for governor, you had to express a faith in Jesus Christ. In South Carolina, if you wanted to hold public office, you had to express a faith in Jesus Christ. But the founders wrote in the Constitution that there would be no national tests on the national level. The founders very much believed in states' rights. They thought what Washington did, what South Carolina did, they did. But nationally, the federal government would not compel anyone. And so there's a ban on religious tests in the Constitution, because it was this belief that we wanted to be welcome to everyone. There were no tests on coming to this country. You didn't have to go. In fact, there were no immigration laws until the 1880s, 1890s. For the first 100 and some odd years of this country's existence, you could come. You didn't need a passport. You didn't need to check in. You checked in in New York, you checked in for health purposes. And if the doctor examined you and thought you were sick, he put you back on the boat. But there was no question, oh, you're from that country, you can't come in, you're from that country, until the 1880s, 1890s. And again, people are sinners and they make mistakes. But I think that's one thing people should really appreciate, this idea that anyone can come here, become an American. I would find it very hard to go to Brazil, I think, and become Brazilian. I could maybe learn Portuguese, the history and the culture. I find it very hard to go to France, I think, and become French. But people from Brazil and France can come to this country and become American. And I think that's a parallel track, if you will, with this idea of universal Christianity. Christ wants you no matter who you are. Well, we'll take you no matter who you are as well. And again, there have been glitches. We can't deny that. But if you accept the Christian idea that men make mistakes, that people are sinners, then you understand where the mistakes come from.
Awesome. You mentioned about the openness that has been embedded in the Christianity, the Bible. I feel that part is I didn't know that before, and I appreciate that sharing.
Yeah.
So
I just think it's a parallel that reflects the Christian beliefs of the founders. So.
So, like, in our audience group, like, do we have like any quick questions for like Kirby Wilbur?
I have a question for Kirby.
Uh-huh.
That's very inspiring sharing, and it's some people will consider it a very strong claim. Obviously you run your radio podcast and many programs and share with people, and some people may consider it is a strong claim that American is a Christian country or Christian Christian nations. Um, uh, so usually in this context, people refer to what the Christianity represent here are the Protestant worldview of Christianity. How much of those worldview has overlaps with the Church of England, with the Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox? Do you think that lies in the founding fathers and what you refer to as the worldview of founding fathers that they share?
I think most of them do. I think the problem with the Catholic Church in the beginning, with Protestants and the Reformation, was the Catholic Church had the Pope. And many Protestants did not see a biblical justification role for the Pope. And so much of the controversy of the 1700s, many of the religious wars were really over the Pope, the authority of the Pope. When you get down to some basic fundamental theological beliefs on who Jesus is, who he said he was, that kind of thing, there's a lot of similarity between them. But the idea of the Pope, and then there's a slight difference on communion, which, to be honest, I kind of vaguely understand. I don't understand why it divided us. Because Orthodox Christianity, the Orthodox ideas, fundamental ideas of Christianity, are shared by almost all those faiths to the degree except perhaps the Pope. And in the Eastern Orthodox, they had their equivalent of the Pope.
Right. So I think the key idea that you shared just now is that the free of being come into this country, which I also read a lot of Bibles, and that's shared by Jesus in his early teachings. However, in the early days, or well, let's say the medieval time, instead the Catholics and the Roman Catholics and the Orthodox Catholic Church are sort of the majority representing Christianity, and they in some sense doesn't have the case has the idea of like everyone can freely become a Christian and then can join their country in this sense, right? If you look at the history where Catholics wage a strong influence, for example, Spanish colonies in a Latino American, they in the early days, they don't like really emphasize those similar worldviews as in U.S. But yet they also believe in what they believe in Jesus. How do people reconcile those differences? And we also see between the authoritative claims of churches like the Roman Catholics, the Eastern Orthodox, and the Church of England, they have waged wars against each other. They divide the world into different power, like when between Spanish colonies and Portuguese colonies.
Right.
These kind of things doesn't happen in the U.S. founding fathers, yet they also claim that they are Christians. How do people reconcile these differences?
Can I make a comment on that?
Sure.
There's an interesting pattern that occurs going all the way back to the initial Judaic code. So you have, 1327 something BC, Moses receives the Ten Commandments and the Israelites start down this path. And that was actually the second, I think the first, well, at least the second or third reaffirmation of the covenant between God and man, which is kind of the background to all of this that Christians think about. And the purpose of God establishing covenant with man was always to have a personal relationship. Over time, they get very legalistic about this, and the system of laws ceases to be liberty and it becomes oppressive. Jesus comes, he's pretty revolutionary. He gets all up in the grill of the oppressive Pharisees and tyrants of the day. And he doesn't do away with the law. He actually reaffirms the law, and in some cases makes it even harder to live by. But he also says, you guys missed the point. This is not for oppression, this is for liberty. And people don't need to go through you, the priesthood, to get to God anymore. They can go through me, and every man can do it. He made one of the most revolutionary statements ever. Men are now priest kings. The priesthood said that they commune directly with God. The kingship said that they take direct authority over the earth. This was a very influential idea for the early Americans too. So Jesus came back and kind of swung the pendulum the other way and said, we're putting heart into this. And he summed up the whole law saying the point of the law is love, right? And God wants your heart. The Catholic Church is what grew out of the early church in a political alliance with Rome. It became pretty oppressive again. Not exclusively. You can read the writings of many great men throughout Catholic history, impressive scholars and theologians, scientists, all of it. And what's really interesting is that the Renaissance largely started in the monasteries. It wasn't until the Reformation, which started partway through the Enlightenment, really, in some ways, that the Catholic Church said, uh-oh, we gave them too much rope. You know, they're going too far. They're trying to work against us now. So ironically, the Catholic Church, which kind of started a lot of the Age of Enlightenment because of their natural inquisitiveness to learn of God's nature, then clamped down really hard. And that is when they became particularly oppressive in the West, at least. And Protestantism was that swinging of the pendulum, much like the original passing of the law, much like Jesus Christ. And they went back to roots and they said, well, we're reading this Bible for ourselves. The printing press had just occurred, so now the common man could read the Bible for themselves. And they said, we don't need a pope between us and God any more than the Jews needed the Pharisees after the coming of Christ. We commune with him directly, and we read his truth for ourselves. And so this is kind of the context of all of that. So the Christianity at large, just like any institution, is what Kirby was saying, right? We're humans. We screw it up. If we didn't, that would be inconsistent with our own theology.
And that's a great point, Skyler, because I think getting back to the point about our founding fathers knew what happened in ancient Rome and the early church, and had learned about how they turned corrupt, they turned oppressive. And that's one of the reasons why they didn't want a national church. Because what the founders saw is that when the church becomes a national church, or a church gets tied in with power, as in politics, that's where corruption comes. Because you have the city of God, the city of man coming together, like Augustine talked about. And so that's why they didn't want a national religion, because they didn't want the faith to be corrupted by the state. They didn't want the state corrupted by a single denomination full of fallible men who are sinners, who would want absolute power, or, as Skyler talked about, use the state to oppress their opposition. And so the founders were aware of that. And they understood, and, to be honest, a lot of the founders didn't like Catholics. A lot of anti-Catholicism in this country, fear of the Pope, fear of the tie between the Catholic Church and the state, which they had seen in the past. But we should remember that Maryland was set up as a colony for Catholics. Every faith kind of had their own colony, and Maryland was set up, named after Queen Mary, the last Catholic queen of England, named after her, to provide a refuge for English Catholics who wanted to get away from the oppression they were facing in Protestant England. The problem was not enough Catholics came, and Maryland eventually became a Protestant colony through majority because not enough Catholics came to settle in Maryland. But they were aware of these issues, and they were aware that we're fallible, and they tried to balance those things here in this country, avoiding the mistakes and structuring a system of checks and balances and separation of powers, so that even if one faction did get a hold of government, that part of government, it could not oppress everyone. They were trying to balance order and liberty. How do you let people be free, but also have order? Something we're seeing on the streets of Seattle and Portland and elsewhere every night. How do you balance your right to be free, but still the need for a secure society, a secure order, where it's safe to walk the streets, you can rely on things you buy, and they try to find that balance. And that, combined with the Christian faith, came up with what we had.
Awesome. I still remember I had a conversation with Chelsea about such ideas. So there is a difference between spiritual and religious.
Mhm.
And like being spiritual, like I think is a synonym, like Chelsea like mentioned, is like faithful. Like we have according to Chelsea, so we have God in our mind, and we trust Him, and we also like would unconsciously sort of kind of like love God back. I cannot say as good as she is. I think Chelsea is also here today. So Chelsea, would you like to have a quick note in here?
Sure, yeah, and I think I explained it to you as religion is more of an external coming in, whereas our spiritual faith journey with God is more of God loves us and He lives inside us, so it's an outpouring of the way that we live, not because we have to, but because we want to in a response to the love that He shows us. So, yeah.
I would say this, by the way, when it comes to denominations within Christianity, I consider myself an Orthodox Christian in the sense that, small o, I accept the Bible, all right? That the Bible is the basis of my belief. And I have more in common theologically, spiritually, religiously with an Orthodox Catholic, Orthodox Methodist, or an Orthodox whatever, Orthodox Baptist, than I do necessarily with someone in my own denomination who may not be Orthodox. A lot of Christians within their faith community reject some of the beliefs or have modified their beliefs. And I think what it really gets down to is the Bible is the standard. And if you accept the Bible, if you accept that Jesus is your Savior, if you accept that there's a way we've been instructed how to live, if you accept this is how we should live, if you accept these basic fundamental truths about Christianity, you have everything in common. So I think denominations are sometimes emphasized too much. And I don't consider myself a religious person in the sense that religion and all its trappings is important to me. My relationship with God and Jesus is what's important. And in that sense, I would say I'm more spiritual than religious. We just have to pick some place to worship, and we're comfortable within the confines of the church we worship at, and comfortable with our leadership and comfortable with people in the church. But I think sometimes people emphasize religion too much.
It's worth noting that, and I've been guilty of this for a lot of my life, criticizing the church a lot for the divisions that exist. And but when you consider that we live in the 21st century now in America, and we know so much about the teachings and beliefs of an obscure
street preacher,
Middle Eastern tribe from 2,000 years ago. And it's like, how is this even possible that we would know so much about something so obscure from so long ago and be influenced by it? It has created more of a unifying factor than people realize. If we hadn't had some kind of core truth that did hold us together somewhat, we would not be a thing. We would have just dispersed into a diaspora of syncretism, like most things do over time. And so it's been pretty, and in America, when we say that we're more unified than most, it's because we haven't fought a religious civil war. In Europe, when you had two religions in the same state, you usually had a civil war that ensued. England was embroiled in Catholic and Protestant civil war, and Ireland has been up into the 80s. And in some places, you still see warfare today. Whereas a huge number of denominations who are vehement about who's correct and fight amongst themselves all the time, nevertheless live in relative peace here.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me ask a very controversial topic, and also come and introduce one of Yang Luo, one of the audience we have now, who is very spiritual. So basically, my attempt for this controversial topic is that, do you think people can make mistakes, people are imperfect, but do you think Bible is perfect? Do you think the people who write Bible is perfect? And how I would kind of introduce Yang Luo in this case is that she studies a lot about she understands about a lot about theology, and she but she is not she doesn't hold her belief in any particular one. So first, I would give an opportunity for our lovely Christians to answer this very this tricky question, and then like I would love to hear how Yang Luo would approach this question.
So who goes first?
Like I don't know, like I would nominate Zach because Zach hasn't got a chance to say anything.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Yeah, I think just to bluntly answer your question, I feel that it's very common belief that, you know, the authors of our scripture were inherently sinful just like everyone else. Otherwise, it would essentially be contradicting itself. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not the inspired word of God. And again, that is the common agreement among the Christian faith, and more importantly, my personal belief also. So again, God, I think, speaks on a more broad aspect. I think God uses everyone who follows him to do some great things. And I think it's just so an overarching theme throughout the Bible that God uses some of the most terrible sinners who've done some of the most heinous things to do his will and to further his kingdom and bring glory to him on the front of Christianity. So I hope I answered your question, but yeah, that's my perspective. Most certainly, to sum up, I think it's known that the authors themselves, of course, not perfect. The only person who is perfect is obviously Jesus Christ, and that is the foundation of our faith. And if that wasn't known, it'd be difficult to say, it would be difficult for Christians to say that, you know, have a foundation of their faith if they didn't believe that aspect. So, yeah.
Got it. So, yeah, like I know like this is a hard question. Sorry for making it especially hard. But like so Yang Luo, like if you are also like close to Mike, like would you like to come in and also share with some of your thoughts?
Yeah, actually, I don't know too much about Christianity, so excuse me if what I say is very different from the general belief there. I think that from a spiritual perspective, the principles that I agree with the most is in the books called Conversations with God. And what's said in there is that everybody is perfect by default. So we're all perfect. We don't have things that we need to redeem ourselves from. And but then it's more of a return to our true nature. So our true nature is perfect, but then we have like this ego and mind on top of our true soul. And so it's important that I think this ties nicely with meditation, and then meditation. And there is a famous author called Eckhart Tolle. He wrote the Power of Now, and basically he speaks a lot about stillness. So if we return from our like very mindful thinkings and you know, from our egos and mind back to the stillness within us, then that is return to our true nature, which is perfect, which is very similar to God. And in the book Conversations with God, it has a very interesting theory. It says that you know, we were all created by God because God wants to experience itself. So we have all the same natures and capabilities of God. But we forget about it because, you know, like this is an experience for us to rediscover our capabilities as God. So, I mean, I can see how this can be very controversial, but I personally feel like it's very empowering to think this way, that we're already perfect and there is nothing we need to do to become perfect. We just need to remember our true nature, which is we're very, very capable and perfect and all love. Yeah.
Okay, so two way. Like first, like I will give like an opportunity for Christians to refute, to say anything that like what is being discussed, like I would like to change some of the perspectives. And a quick question for Yang Luo is that like what are like your spiritual practices, like if you could, like because it seems that like you are linking between like, kind of mindfulness, like the meditation, and also like you are also reading like ideas about Christianity. So I will like, so for like Skyler, Kirby, Zach, or Chelsea, whoever you would like to address some of like the things like Yang Luo just said, feel free to jump in.
I would just ask a question. How do you explain the nature of evil? If we're all perfect and we simply need to go back to meditation and need to go back to examine these premises, how do you explain evil, the absolute evil of someone like an Adolf Hitler or Ted Bundy or how do you explain evil if they're perfect beings who simply need to adjust their habits or their behavior to reach that state of perfection, I guess?
I would say they're just too asleep. So if a person is truly awakened, then they remember their true nature as godlike, which is pure love. But people who are asleep, they don't remember their true nature as that. And so they were immersed into, like this evilness thinking that they believe they need to, be superior than others for them to feel sufficient. But that's like false thinking. I think there's a lot of this kind of false thinking in the society. Hitler is just a more extreme example.
Well, he's very extreme. So Stalin, Ted Bundy, people like that. I'm just wondering, are you suggesting that intervention or someone helping them along the way would have turned them away from their course? That if someone had interfered or interrupted Hitler at some point in his youth and redirected him, then there would be 6 million more Jews alive today? I'm just curious.
Yeah, about Hitler, there is a very interesting, maybe it's a story, but like there's another author called Dolores Cannon. She conducted a lot of past life regressions. So she's a past life hypnotist. And then, so in one of her books, so she hypnotized a lot of her clients and asked about all kinds of questions. And then, so in one of her books, one of her clients answered this question of, the karma of Hitler. And then the opinion there is very interesting. It says that the karma is mostly on Hitler's father, not on Hitler himself, because Hitler was a very creative soul. And then he wanted to be an artist, but that was very much suppressed by his father when he was a child. So if he was given that outlet to express his creative talent, he may very much become a very talented artist instead of having to express his passion and this super powerful drive within him in this extreme way. So I think that's an interesting perspective that like maybe Hitler's true nature is also like super loving, but because he was raised in this very distorted way, so he didn't have a good way to channel his drive properly. So I think that's an interesting perspective to think about on that topic.
I like what I find, sorry for jumping in, like I have like I'm very ignorant about like the Christianity topic, but like, so Yang Lu, I just want to like quickly check with you that like the book, it says like in Christianity, like people are like naturally perfect. Can I like, is that true? Like in that book?
So I think you mean Conversations with God, the first one that I mentioned?
Oh yeah, so you mentioned like people are naturally perfect, but sometimes people have ego, so that sort of overshadows. Like I kind of like would want to pinpoint this because like the previous like talk by Kirby and also Chelsea like mentioned that like people are like natively sinners, like people do like they are imperfect, they do bad things. So I kind of see like there's a controversial like opinion over there, like even by the book like that is talks about Christianity.
Hey, this is Zach. I had one thought here. One thing that I think is important to note, sorry, my kids are around. But one thing that I think is important to note is when you say inherently evil or perfect, perfect is the only word of those two that is absolute. When you say someone is evil, there's a lot of ambiguity and room for interpretation as far as evil. Do we look at the extreme examples we've already talked about, like Ted Bundy and Hitler, or do we just talk about sinful nature by itself? For example, the children I just mentioned, I can tell you that we're not naturally perfect. when they're that young, their mindset is naturally mine. I'm gonna get the biggest piece of cake. This is mine. Everything, you know what I'm saying? Now, can evil be learned? Of course, in bad behavior, but so can good behavior. And I think that's one important thing to understand, is that God demands absolute perfection. Going back to that word, the absolute word within those two, is what from the Christian faith, God the Father demands perfection, and clearly we cannot meet that as human beings, because we do have that inherent sinful nature. So again, that doesn't mean we're all naturally, murderers or rapists naturally, although those sins might be, something that folks do. I think the overall point is that nobody is perfect. But again, the evil is a very non-specific term. And of course, meditation is proven to be helpful for spiritual health and emotional health. I think both from a secular standpoint and a Christian standpoint, that can be important or helpful. But the overall meaning or nature from the Christian standpoint, we cannot, if we were perfect, there'd be no need for a Savior, Jesus Christ, who is the only one who was perfect and was able to meet that standard. So those are just my thoughts. Thanks.
Zach, that's a great point. The perfect is absolute. Evil is not. Evil is lying to your mother about where you were last night. Evil is lying to your wife about what you spent the money on. Evil is cheating your neighbor. Evil is killing 6 million Jews. There are degrees of evil. But we're talking evil, we talk about deviation from the standard of perfection. Not all of us are mass murderers, but yet we're all sinners. And so that's a great point, that perfection is an absolute term in the way that evil is not. Good point.
It's worth pointing out, we're getting some interesting questions about Gnosticism and things, and I think these are all fairly related. And so we're drifting quite a ways off the topic of historical context and into some pretty controversial territory here, but I'll go ahead and plug my 2 cents here. So the thing that these all haven't, I'm sorry, go ahead, Tyra.
Oh, I'm not sure, if you're going to address some of one or two questions from Lewis, because Lewis mentioned about universalism, but I would love to invite Lewis to give us a quick introduction or definition about what do you mean by universalism in your context. Lewis. Hello, Lewis, are you there?
Maybe he can only type.
Oh, I think Lewis muted himself.
Definitely there.
Yeah, he's still typing, but let's rewind back to him until he has access to give us a sort of a better context about his questions. How's that?
Right. And I do know that as a follow-up to what he was talking about universality, Tim mentioned a little bit about the Tower of Babel as to how, in a way, that was a proof that God was against universality for humankind. Although I may disagree on that point because of how I was taught about the story of Tower of Babel, but I would like to hear from y'all in that sense, based on that little context I just gave y'all.
Yeah, I also heard a different reason that the Babel Tower was failed. It failed not because God doesn't like universalism, but because the ego that people actually built tower for.
Right, because well, at least in the interpretation I got what I was taught was that this was them attempting saying, oh, when we can reach the skies, we can do things without God, and so that's not how it works.
Yeah.
Hi, I am Tim. Can I just give more details of my question? From my understanding, it's people in the Bible built Babel, which God doesn't favor, and He destroyed it. I think this is kind of a symbolism that human efforts to unite all human which will fail eventually. This is my interpretation of that, because we don't know if this is only our ego or this is the revelation from God. Because when we are talking about revelation from God or by God, it's very difficult to know if it is true, because it can be influenced from evil being, right? You don't know that. And if it is so unique that the God only revealed that to you, is that possible that this message could be so unique that everyone receives is fundamentally different? And if this is true, is the universality we talk about still a possible, a feasible project?
I'd love to make a couple comments on that. Boy, you guys are like unpacking the most complex issues. And I have to say that really the study of many of these topics is, something I've spent years on. So probably, yeah.
We have like the most like our friends, like they range from not knowing about Christianity or just like coming here to grasp like the very basic idea to the people who also study years of theology. So let's be quick on this, and then we can return back to the main topic.
So the question of universality and how do we think? I'm gonna frame it this way: how can Christianity be considered universal if God is clearly drawing a distinction and saying some people go to heaven, some go to hell? I don't like this tower, I'm going to tear that down, that kind of stuff. The claim goes like this, that, and this is historical context again, that the nation of Israel in particular highlights that God wants man to interact with him on God's own terms. And so the statement, to harken back to the earlier, is that man is definitely born into evil. I think that we find tangentially some interesting scientific backup for this in the emerging field of epigenetics, that we really can't help ourselves. We're going to be missing the mark, which is what sin means. It's not exactly a stark death penalty. It just means you're not quite hitting the mark. You're a little off. And so the presumption is that humanity, somewhere along the line, in evolution or creation, kind of went off the rails. God's covenant with man and Israel said, I'm trying to get you back on the rails. I love you. I want you to be in relationship with me, but you have to do it on my terms. Every attempt that man made to interact with the one true God on man's own terms ended very badly. To some extent, that's the Tower of Babel. That's certainly the sacrifice of Cain and the story of Cain and Abel, where Cain was trying to reach God on his own terms. It was the case right after God established the 10 Commandments and they created a priesthood. He killed outright, he burned to death the two sons of Aaron, two priests who broke God's code and approached him the wrong way. It was very dire. So he's not a particularly forgiving God in that regard, but on the flip side, he also said that anybody who is approaching him on my terms may come. So the Israelite nation had laws in place to allow anybody to join the nation. In some cases, it would take more time than others, depending on history with certain nations. But generally, the principle was anybody can become a member of the nation of Israel or God's nation. And after Christ, that was most definitely expanded to include the whole world. Christ didn't just say, go preach to people. He said, go convert nations, disciple the nations, which is a very large political statement as well as an individual one. And he said, anybody can be a part of this, and we're expanding it beyond even the borders of Israel. So when we say universality, we say, yes, anybody can be a part of this and God wants everybody to be a part of it, but it is in accordance with godly truth, basically. So I hope that helps present at least a Christian narrative of that concept.
Thanks, Skyler. So, I would like to propose, Skyler, you would have anything to add to this, your presentation, because unfortunately we have kind of deviate from the presentation mode to the discussion mode,
That's good.
So
sure. You actually asked me to prepare a couple of slides just talking about some of the current cultural norms that we experience and how they tie into historical roots. Would you like me to present those?
Yeah, that would be awesome. But maybe we can be a bit more succinct if Kirby has already covered that.
Sure. Yeah.
Oh, I shall give you like now you can share screen now. I'm so sorry.
Perfect. Incidentally, just after the talk, I'm happy to talk at great length with anybody who wants to know more about Christian ideals and things. I love these topics, and I like to be challenged as well. So I'm very grateful
and
for this.
we have like a lot of like very like curious, inquisitive like friends in our group, like who also like know and have many questions about Christianity, because we have been debating a couple of days even before this presentation. So I would definitely share like our presenters like Skyler and Kirby, like your like email contact information, so they can come in with more detailed questions.
Sure. All right, can everybody see my screen? Is that coming through? So this is just a few quick slides to kind of run through and talk about the historical significance. Tyra had asked me, what are some things we see in common life in the West that maybe have roots in Christianity or Judaism? And the short answer is, to some degree, everything. We are still a syncretic mix. The West is a strong influence of Christianity and also Greek thought. And the early Renaissance people in particular didn't see a conflict between the two. They thought they were very harmonious. But these are some of the more obvious Christian ones. So in the ancient days, they had the Sabbath Laws, and we see this show up in the way that our legal system and our daily life shows up a lot. We have weekends. That's part of the Jewish tradition of Sabbath. We have 2 days on our weekend because the Saturday is presumably the Jewish day off and Sunday was the Protestant day off. And they said, well, we'll just take them both off, which I'm grateful for personally. Every 7 years, so the Jewish economy ran on a 7-year debt cycle. No debt, no loan could be extended for more than 7 years, and at the 7-year mark, it was forgiven. No matter, and that was absolute 7 years. So if you did a loan in year 6, the next year it was going to be null and void. So you had to be very careful about when you were giving loans out. We still see remnants of this today. The colonies, the early colonies, had a lot of debt laws like this. You saw Kirby was mentioning that indentured servants would come over, and in many cases, not all, but many cases, they were limited to a 7-year contract. And that was this, going back to these laws. Even today, if I go bankrupt, my credit history is going to be wiped out after 7 years, so that banks can't discriminate against me anymore past that point. So that one's been very influential kind of economically. There's a strong influence in the West from the Judeo-cleanliness laws to varying degrees, but it became an axiom you've probably heard in the West that cleanliness is next to godliness. And it finds its root in this. The Jews were told to wash their hands. They were told to prepare their food very carefully. They were told not to eat certain foods, which we now know were particularly susceptible to diseases or spoiling fast or things like this. They were told to quarantine their sick people. These are all really weird things. They had no idea why they were doing them, right? It just looked weird to the surrounding nations. But then later, like much, much, much later, science came along and said, actually, some of those were pretty good ideas, as it turns out, because we know that germs are a thing, so sterilization is good. Quarantine is a great way to slow the spread of disease, all these kinds of things. So this had a big influence, a big impact. And those kinds of things were starting to become known in early America because, as we said, the Americans were very empirical as opposed to rational. They liked to observe the material world and see what worked and what didn't. That came from their Scottish Enlightenment roots. So they started to figure a lot of this out, and they traced it back to the Bible and said, well, see, we're proving now that God is right. That was a common theme in American thought, which, again, very controversial, but made a lot of sense to them. Other influences, charity. It really depends on the culture. I've traveled through some cultures today where charity is definitely not the norm. So even in this day and age, but it's deeply rooted in Western mindset. You give food and clothing to the poor. I create a database. I'm creating a database of all the resources to help people in Washington State for a state nonprofit client. And I'm amazed. Like, I am a Christian, but I'm amazed. Like, half of the database is just churches. I mean, if you're in desperate need, you can just go to, nearly half the churches in the state and say, I need food, I need clothing, something. And they have apartments set aside to help you with things. So traditionally, the church has a heavy hand in charity, making sure the poor are taken care of. Modesty, our modesty code. All cultures typically have some sort of modesty code. In the West, you can trace a lot of our peculiarities to Puritanism, which to varying degrees traced its roots back to biblical standards. It's a very kind of subjective one, but it's heavy in our consciousness. Holidays. Some of our holidays are definitely not Christian in root. Easter is the most Christian one. That celebrates the birth of Christ. It tracks with Lent and Catholicism. And Protestants typically keep that too, although not all of them do. Christmas is very syncretic, so it probably has pagan roots, but in the modern era, we associate that as celebrating the birth of Christ. So Easter is the resurrection, the death and resurrection. Christmas is the birth. Thanksgiving is interestingly considered a very religious holiday in America. And it started in America. It has no ancient roots, but harvest holidays are a thing in a lot of cultures as well. And in America, they trace the roots to Sukkot, which is the Jewish harvest holiday that dates back to the time of Moses. The human rights, again, just drop some controversial grenades out there, but in the early days, the initiatives for ending slavery and emancipation of women started largely in church movements because, again, these were rationalists in America, empirical rationalists, who were looking at the biblical texts and saying, it's very incongruous to say that all men are equal before God and not include the African slaves. And at every evolution of the Constitution, there was a strong battle to try to end slavery right there. 1776, 1787, each new iteration of the Constitution. And it was from the northern states who had outlawed slavery already, saying we need to make this part of the federal Constitution. And in each case, they did not, because it was a complete gridlock with the southern states. But they traced this back to the ancient code of Israel. And Israel lived in a time when all men were slaves. If you were in any nation, you were a slave to the king, implicitly. But they moved the needle philosophically strongly towards not having slavery. They put that 7-year limit on it. They said you have to release your slaves, debtors, every 7 years. They said you cannot own your children. You cannot, which was very untypical. They said you cannot own your wife, which kind of bleeds into the next one. It's popularly thought that the ancient Israel code actually codified ownership of women. It mostly comes down to a couple of verses which are very misunderstood. But, and frankly, the words are mistranslated. They say selling when what they mean is that she got a dowry. But unlike medieval Europe, where the man pursuing marriage got a dowry, which made daughters a liability, the Israelite code said that the man brings a dowry to the woman, and it's basically her insurance. If he dies, she has what was usually about 3 years worth of income to sustain herself on. And that dowry showed up in all of the transactions in ancient Israel. So if a woman was pressed into marriage, the one case they acknowledged was customary at the time was to sell your children to settle debts. And God said, you cannot sell your children. But if you insist on giving your daughter in marriage to somebody, she can give the dowry to you to help settle your debts. But in that case, she wasn't sold. She had the same marriage rights as any other woman. And if the person who married her did not uphold his end of the contract, giving her shelter, food, bed rights, in other words, sex and children and things, she could leave him. She could walk out legally, and he could not keep her. So it's a thing where you have to kind of look at it in the context of its times for sure. But the ancient code, again, was way ahead of its time in terms of setting limits and setting rights for women. And this was cited heavily in the Americas when they said it's time for us to start giving women rights. And so you saw in America, and this is very illustrative of our whole history, isn't it? That on the one hand, Christians were strong opponents of emancipation of women because they were very culturally focused and saying, we don't want things to change. But on the flip side, you saw a lot of Christians saying, well, this is rational. This is how God envisioned things going. And so after it finally passed, very quickly, the majority of Christians adopted it and said, yeah, actually, this makes way more sense. It's correct to have women equal with men. This is what God intended. Well, I think that is as quick a summary as I could make of some of the stuff. Heather and I talked a lot, and there's so many things in our culture that you could trace back to Christian roots. But that was kind of what I put together, Tyra.
That's awesome. Actually, we have like friends who are starting to ask more questions, and I would like to invite Yulov to ask a question that like some of us has voted up to ask you guys like with our kind of like things that we are curious about.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you a lot, Skyler. Thank you a lot, Kirby. As a person who went to Christian schools for 4 years of my high school, it's like very formative years, and I have like learned a lot about Christianity and have a lot of questions from both from my past experience and from like today's like your presentations today. So my main question is that is Christianity a necessary or sufficient condition in the establishment of these egalitarian ideals, for example, anti-slavery, gender equality, immigration in the United States? Like how much does the umbrella terms Christianity shapes the political system and cultural identities of the United States, like as a necessary or sufficient condition? I'll just like, this is my question. I'll like expand like why what motivated my question. Mm-hmm. So Christianity as a religion has 2,000 years of history. But why is that the case that before the Enlightenment movement, these egalitarian ideas was not mainstream? So like all man's created equal, it's not like, although like Bible, like the New Testament has a lot of egalitarian ideals. Why is like that all men are created equal? And like men, it's just men. But you can say, yeah. I mean, all people are created equal did not become a mainstream idea until like egalitarian movement. This is the first motivation. The second motivation is that the United States is not the country with the most Christians. It's like 80%, maybe 70 to 80% that regularly goes to church. But why is America a country made of immigrants and not other countries that has a higher percentage of Christians, for example, Armenian? Haiti is also immigrants, but it's mostly like African diaspora. And this is the second motivation. Why is this a necessary result of Christianity, while a lot of other countries with a lot of Christians are not accepting to all people from all regions, all like origins? The third motivation is that I feel that if you examine the history of the United States, the equality, the acceptance, the egalitarianism has always been with conditions. Like non-European descendant people, like especially African slaves, like even like people with Asian origin, they're like excluded from this acceptance of like people from like all over the world. And also even Native Americans, like as a perfect example, they're the original residents of this country. Of course, like people are not like perfect. It's like necessary, like it's also a part of the Christian ideal that Christian ideas that we are all like flawed, we're all like sinned. But since people are not equal, people are not like perfect, this kind of conditional egalitarianism, how is this kind of conditional egalitarianism different from, let's say, the Hinduism egalitarianism that we are not like limiting our country to like a Hindu nation, but this is the ideal of our country. That's a lot of Hindu nationalists has talked to me like this, just saying we don't hate the Muslims, we just don't want them to follow the Hindu lifestyle. And also the Chinese style, when they like Chinese people, when they're saying, we have very egalitarian, if you take the Chinese style of life, whatever the ethnicity you are, like Tibetan, Uyghur, or like me, Tujia, you can just be all Chinese.
Yeah, I can add to that. The Chinese used to have some kind of rules that as long as you get to the national exams and you are able to communicate and write, you can like pretty much get very prestige positions in the government. That kind of concept seems to be universal somewhere in different cultures.
Yeah, so Yeah, sorry. These are all conditional egalitarianism, just like the American conditional egalitarianism. Yeah, this is all of my question.
Well, I see there's some fundamental differences. I hope I remember all three of your questions.
I know, I'm having a hard time remembering them all.
Number one, let's go backwards. You mentioned Armenia and other countries that have higher proportions of Christians. Armenia has been Christian since like 300 AD. They were the first real nation outside the Roman Empire to accept Christianity. And they're relatively homogenous. They've undergone a lot of oppression from the Russians and from others, from the Turks, from the Muslims. Throughout the years, you've heard the Armenian extermination, the genocide against Armenians by the Turks at the end of World War I. Faith tends to sharpen, I think, under harsh conditions. And I think if you look at the history of the church, you'll see when the church is persecuted, it gets sharper, it gets more defined, it gets more adherence. And Armenia in particular, over the past century, has undergone such oppression. I suspect they're very strong Christians today. In America, one of the problems the church faces, I believe, is prosperity. The prosperity brought by our Christian roots. And when you're doing well, all of a sudden you don't need God because it's all you. But boy, when 9/11 came, when those towers got hit, the churches were fuller on 9/12 than they were on 9/10. And it just seems to me that as a nation gets more prosperous, as a nation gets more refined, faith loses its impact on people because you don't need God anymore because everything's going great. So I think in certain countries you're going to find that have gone through a lot of adversity, you're going to find a higher level of faith, just for that exact reason. I suspect churches in countries like Russia, China, other countries where they're persecuted are probably stronger because of the persecution. Whereas in America, we've had it relatively easy for quite some time. And you lose that sharpness that comes with persecution or opposition. Your second question, going back to the universality, if I recall the question, probably correct me if I'm wrong. How would I put that? Well, Skyler, if you can think of something, you go ahead, because I had a thought and I just lost it, which I apologize for.
Sure. He typed it up for us in the chat too, so I'm just going to read his question. It sums up what he said nicely. Is Christianity necessary or sufficient in the establishment of egalitarian ideals such as anti-slavery, gender equality, immigration, etc., in the United States?
It sounds like it's a question of inference, like versus causality.
Yeah. The answer, I think, is, well, I'm glad you scoped it to the United States, because the universal question would be even more theoretical. But kind of harkening back to the roots in Judaism, it was actually built to be a little more inclusive than we think. The point of the laws was to protect people who follow them, not to keep people from joining the nation. And so there was a sense of, there are universal laws that are necessary for the orderly production of society. And it's significant that the forefathers, when they took those ideals in America, they said, what we're going for is not freedom. We're not even going for egalitarianism. That's just a byproduct. We're going for liberty. Liberty says explicitly, you will give up certain rights in order to protect the other ones. And so then the question in that sense is, what will be our code? You know, what will be the law system that we abide by? The forefathers adopted Christianity by default because that was their background, and they said this will be our code. And an empirical person such as myself looks at the history of how that worked out and says that worked pretty good. I think that the Christian code, as it were, generally shared by a lot of churches for the most part, has done a good job of providing a productive atmosphere, a productive society for many people to engage in and continue to work in. It was obviously started, and this has to be acknowledged, this is one of those unpopular historical things. I will say that we tend to take our modern sense of justice and superimpose it in the past. But even as recently as the 1600s, white men were discriminated against because all men were discriminated against. And when Scotland, for example, said we're going to demand legally that all white boys get educated, that was the first European enfranchisement of white males. And it came again in the colonies. I think it was Maine or Rhode Island that said a similar thing in the early days. It said, we're going to insist on education, you know, for all white males. Or no, it was that they said all white males can vote. That was revolutionary. And that quickly caught on in the colonies, and they said that all landowners, which were predominantly white males because of really historical context, there weren't a lot of other people here, they said they can vote. So the process of enfranchisement has been a very gradual one. Christians look back on that and say this is completely congruous with the literal interpretation of the biblical word. But it has taken time for this to expand its scope to include all nationalities, all genders, right? It's a gradual process because mankind was really stuck in the mode of monarchy and slavery for so many years. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yes.
Could I
yes.
add-
Oh, sorry.
Can I add
Yes.
one thing to that? That I want to ask Skyler. You did a very good job. I think it's not necessary to be a Christian to abolish slavery.
No.
But not many societies stood on their own until England and America, the two most prominent Christian societies in the world at the time. Great Britain did it peacefully. We did it through a war. Slavery still exists throughout the world today. There are millions of slaves throughout the world today. Not perhaps on the scale of America, where slaves are harnessed for agricultural purposes, but there are slaves throughout the world today. And throughout history, slavery has been accepted as a natural position. And I find it worth your consideration that in the two places in the modern world that ended slavery, you just stood up and said it was wrong, Christian Great Britain, Christian America, they did it through legislation and persuasion. We did it through a war. And I think it's worth noting that nobody else led the parade. No other nation or society stood up first and said, we decided this is wrong, and have ended it. And slavery is not always necessarily direct ownership of a human being. Slavery can be through oppression of a class. The undesirables in India, perhaps. Sometimes it's based on classism. Sometimes it's based on tribalism. It's not always based on race. But I think it's worth noting and considering that the two places that took the big steps to end it first were Christian nations.
Thank you for your answer.
There are also other many of considered Christian countries who didn't didn't abolish the slavery. I just like to mention, but I want to slightly differentiate the question a little bit about the slavery and all other egalitarian ideals. Many of your audience here come from China or educated from China, and when we were reading the world history and the U.S. history, a few things, principles that's right in our eyes are the ideals of separate power, check and balance, and voting rights. How do Kirby and Skyler and everyone else connect these ideas to Christianity? Or do you think these just happen to be some other things that U.S. countries bring up? Or do you think that's American enough that it also is a reflection of the Founding Fathers' Christianity worldview?
I would say it is, but not just Christian worldview, but also history, Greek history, biblical history, Roman history. If you start from the idea that man is corrupt, that man is fallen, that man is imperfect, he can't be trusted with absolute power. The kings of Europe had absolute power. Some were corrupt, some were good, some were really bad. So the founders were, and remember, this type of government the founders created, a representative republic, had never been successfully founded anywhere. Greece had a bit for a while, Rome had it for a while, the Italian republics, but they all fell. And the founders spent a lot of time talking and studying why did Venice fall? Why did Rome fail? What happened in Greece? And they come to the conclusion that because man is fallible, because you have mob rule, because you might have tyrants come to power, that you have to separate and diffuse power so that no one segment of society, no one branch of government has power over the others. So you have this balance of power, separation of powers in American government. The judiciary rules on the constitutionality of law, but the president appoints the judges, and then the Senate has to approve them. The House passes money bills, but the Senate has to approve it, and the president can veto it. Then it goes back to the House, and if you have enough votes, override the veto. This entire idea, the federal government has certain powers, the state government has other powers. This entire idea that weaves throughout the entire American system has its roots in the Christian belief that man is corrupt and can't be trusted with absolute power, as proven throughout history. And the founders put their study of history and their worldview together, and they spent a lot of time constructing this. It's very unique. It was the first of its kind. And remember, Benjamin Franklin said, when asked by someone outside the convention, Dr. Franklin, what have you given us? He told her, a republic if you can keep it, because the founders are pessimistic about the survivability of the republic given human nature, given their view of human nature. And they just hoped we would survive long enough. A lot of them didn't think we'd survive very long.
Yeah, the reason I asked this is because there are other countries who claim to be Christian, and then they didn't seem to impose this until very late. Right. And then especially when you see Russia, you see these authoritarian and also slaves until very late. And then if you don't consider those as Christianity, and only like narrow down to the Protestant branch or denominations of them, how come, for example, like Deutschland doesn't, or Germany, who are considered Protestant countries, didn't impose those ideas until like very late?
Until America imposed them at the end of World War II.
Exactly. So is it really more of an American thing or an American Enlightenment movements than the Christianity, the implementation of Christianity principles?
Well, I think America is a unique example, because we were founded from the beginning on what I consider the Christian worldview. Other nations have historic foundings through tribalism, through conquest, and they come to Christianity late. You have Russia converting to Christianity, you have Armenia converting to Christianity. It's rare a country like America that brings talent from all over the world who came here to get away from the conflict, which they saw in Christianity and Christian Europe, between Catholic and Protestant, and between king and priest. Understand that they came to flee from that conflict. That was their background. Their families had come in many cases to flee. So you had a mixture of people, mostly English, but a fair amount of Germans and others. They're European. They came to this country and they had this background. Then they had their beliefs. If you look at the founding fathers, for instance, John Adams said, the Bible is the most Republican book in the world. He didn't mean Republican, big R, like Donald Trump or Ronald Reagan. He meant Republican in terms of being friendly to the idea of self-government. This was a brand new idea that we could rule ourselves. England kind of had it, but they had very limited franchise, and they had a king. We weren't going to have a king. So I think America's unique opportunity in the history of the world to have these ideas, plus the background of the people, plus the founding of a nation from scratch that isn't true in those other nations. Excuse me. And again, given that Christianity teaches or preaches that you and I are imperfect, we can't be trusted with absolute power, the founders understood the need to create a structure that would diffuse that power. Russia had the Russian Orthodox Church and the czars replaced by the communists, which weren't much better. And now you have Putin, who is an ex-communist, ex-KGB guy, and he claims Christianity to provide a cloak for his power. I don't know that Putin is really a believing Christian, but they grabbed the church as a cover to promote unity within the country, because they don't have communism anymore, and other countries. But if you look at Holland, if you look at some of the other European countries, you see a glimmer of this kind of thing, of limited government, diffusion of power. It just saw it's really coming out here. And then other countries followed. You had the French Revolution. You had other countries copy us. You had the Poles try to copy us until the Russians conquered them late 1700s. We really set the example. And even now, you have protesters around the world. When they protest, in Hong Kong, they're waving American flags and reading the Declaration of Independence. It's kind of a universal appeal in my mind to people, this idea that you can rule yourself, you can govern yourself. Because as Skyler pointed out, it doesn't happen in the world very often. You look at our history, recorded history of 5,000 years, if you think of that period of time, it's very rare for a country to choose self-government and survive for a long period of time.
Well, I think we can say too, and you'll understand speaking to a Chinese audience, that traditions are very constraining upon us. Mm-hmm. Traditions, and our history are extremely constraining upon us. And so even other ostensibly Christian nations in Europe, Christianity notwithstanding, weren't going to change much very quickly because they had thousands of years behind them in some cases. And so in the case of America, it was frankly a very improbable set of circumstances that allowed a bunch of people with these ideas to start a government from scratch with no history. And
yet they have histories
Yeah.
they bear the history of Catholics English, right? And many of them
Yeah.
in the European countries. I also like to add to the as Kirby mentioned that Roman didn't successfully have their democracy lasted. Like we all agree that democracy is a good thing, and what US has a governance system. Like in principle, like people agree these are all like good things, but my question is more about like proving the Christianity lead to these. And then when you mentioned Roman, at the time when they have they have their own like republics and their elders of who their senates and systems, that's when they haven't accepted Christianity. Instead, when they accepted Christianity, they have the emperor. It was the emperor who accepted the Christianity. And also, by the way, at the time, they have had a long history of democracy until they fail, which I think, I don't remember exact time span, but I think it's longer than what US has currently sustained its democracy. Do we know if US will come up with an emperor just like Roman did a few hundred years later? We don't know yet. We hope not, but I doubt like it's so. My confusion is how to claim or how to see the Christianity lead to all these good universal principles that we accept that founded US.
I have two amusing thoughts for you on that. The one is short, and it's that America will eventually fail, or turn into something else. And no nation lasts forever. And I don't think that most rational Christians think that we don't conflate America with Christianity too much. We just see America as a really beautiful place where more than most really nasty places, which we're all kind of nasty, I'm including America in this, more than most, we've managed to live out some of these Christian ideals, and we believe that they've turned out pretty well for people. But I don't think you'll ever see a perfect implementation until, the kingdom of Christ, as we say in Christianity. The second one is kind of going back to, why is it working in America and hasn't happened in other Christian nations? And there's two refinements to what we've said so far that I think will help you with that one. One, maybe it's just one, in fact. Really, it's just going back to, we have to share the credit with England to a large degree. And if you want a little bit of additional research, I highly recommend looking up the Scottish common sense realism on Wikipedia. And that's going to be a jumping off point for some really interesting kind of aspiring research. England actually, they had a Scottish Enlightenment in Scotland, which was way ahead of its time for education and emancipation of people generally. The philosophers from there, notably John Locke, Dugald Stewart, many others, Hume, Adam Smith, yes, economists, these all came from the same kind of movement, and they had a way outsized influence on the American forefathers. So much more than we were influenced by the European Enlightenment, we were influenced by the Scottish Enlightenment specifically. And those two things are kind of at odds. The Scottish Enlightenment was very much empirically based, which means we're practical, we want the evidence, we want to move on this. And in addition, the Scottish common sense realism was specifically a Christian angle on empiricism. It was a bit of a rebuttal to saying that we can do empiricism without the assumption of God. And that was specifically what the American forefathers had been taught. It happens that many of the founders of our universities who taught the forefathers as kids came from the universities of Scotland during the Scottish Enlightenment. So there's like a direct transfer of this knowledge. So really we trace these ideas back through England and Scotland. England had a very similar kind of revolution called the Glorious Revolution. Was this the late 1600s or early 1700s?
1689.
And it didn't,
Restoration.
It didn't yield a complete change of events because, again, history had hundreds of years, at least at this point, of history behind them. And they were embroiled with other European powers. But when those same ideas finally took root in America, these were still Whigs, as they were called. That was the political party. There were no entanglements to keep it from coming to fruition. So they just went for it. And my second point for you is that you're I love because we're approaching it rationally. And this is a common kind of schism I see between Europeans trying to communicate with Americans on these topics, because we are coming from an empirical background. And to some extent, we're like, I don't care as long as it works. It's like we invented the school of pragmatism, and that was directly in the lineage of the Scottish Enlightenment. Whereas the European Enlightenment, which is more broadly known, was really based in rationality. And so the empiricism just wants to look and say, well, where did it come from and did it work? Which in our case, we're like, well, yeah, Christianity, we can trace the roots. It came here. Here's why we're different. And so we can explain why it worked better here compared to European countries. But then the rationalists just want to look at it and say, well, but does it really, like, was this required? That was your question. Like, is it necessary to say that Christianity is what spawned this? And we're like, I don't know, but certainly we can say that it did, right? That's the empirical standpoint. So anyway, okay. That's an amusing observation.
That's very amusing. I'm so sorry to cut it a little bit short and jump in, because like we are really over past time of like the discussion part. So we have like, how about like let us like ask the last question. Like Shi Wei has already raised his hand, and in the meanwhile, would you guys mind I start to do like a kind of like a side-by-side sharing of kind of like a graph, so that like whoever in our group has ever practiced like mindfulness, meditation, can start think about some of the meditative moments, and I will quickly like let a few like 2 to 3 people to do a quick sharing, so that like Skyler and Kirby could have some insights into like our perspective and what we have experienced. So let's do this like 2 things all together. So Shi Wei, why don't you start asking the question, and I start to share the screen, and people can start like choose whatever, like to think about some mindful moments, and then I will do some questions. How Shi Wei?
Cool. Can you guys hear me? Because it wasn't working before. Okay, cool. So first of all, thanks Skyler and Kirby for sharing, and this is definitely a very enlightening view, because I am not a Christian, I am an atheist, and I usually don't think about things from the religious perspective. I usually think about things in like economy, like evolution, and things like that. And so my question is actually pretty similar to what Zainan and Yulo have been asking, and but it's mainly from like a more like economic perspective. So I want to bring back to the definition of the Christian nation. I totally agree that Christianity plays a very big role in the foundation of this nation. But so whenever we say it's a Christian nation, it seems to imply causality, right? So we talk about causality. It's like it's at least it's the main cause, or the main driving force for this nation. But is it possible that there are other causes like economy, or is it just that we are at the stage that we are due for a revolution? For example, if Steve Jobs didn't invent the iPhone, someone else will. Is it possible that like at this stage of time when the economic has been, in this stage, and then we have the knowledge from all kinds of different, background or dimension, or, I mean, is it possible that someone else, something else that caused the revolution of the nation? And it is possible that it's the inclusiveness that caused, I mean, you seem to suggest that the Christian belief is the cause of inclusiveness of the United States. But is it possible that we first come up with the idea of liberty, and the Christianity is just one of its instance, and because we are inclusive, and then we think like Christianity is just one of the branch of the liberty. Yeah, so I guess to summarize my question, is it possible that the causality is kind of reversed? It's not the Christianity that causes the, the United States nation. It's the other way around. It's the inclusiveness that make the Christianity like just like a baseline for everyone's religion. I mean, yeah, that's my question.
To add on top of that, like that's actually like many sort of like questions that like from people who don't have like a Christian background. So just want to give like a little bit of like sort of like idea here. So I do have encounter friends who also like ask very similar questions. So basically, is it because like the Americans have the liberty first and then like say that, hey, like this is like the result of like the Christianity beliefs. So to me, I feel that like Skyler's presentation, also Kirby's like history like kind of history like sharing has mentioned that like this, I kind of feel like these two factors are intertwined with each other. Is because of these people, like these characters of these beliefs make people to work together to be able to create something that actually worked in that historical context. But like why would like shall we like leave like 2 minutes for Skyler and Kirby to answer Shui's question, if you guys are willing to?
Skyler, you want to go first?
All right, 2 minutes. The answer is yes to both. So Christianity and American history did not operate in a vacuum. And so I think it's not an either or case. It's that, yes, many influences besides just Christianity played a part, right? Put pressure on the outcome of the Americas. Economic reasons, you know, the first settlement, the Virginia colony, was mostly for economic reasons, but it happens that many of the next ones were all Christian based. So we have both. There's many reasons why America developed the way it was. And part of the reason for egalitarianism was the pressure of having many kind of Christian sects here at the same time. So for practical reasons, they had to figure out how to work together. But it's also true that they found biblical reasons to do that. They were like, well, this is congruous. And I think a lot of human history is people kind of figuring things out by trial and error empirically, right? Especially in the modern age, and they're discovering like, oh, this is what the Bible's talking about. This makes so much more sense. No, I experienced that in my own life. So, and at that point, it becomes codified on biblical grounds. So that would be my answer to your question. Like, does this operate in a vacuum? No. But is liberty still largely dependent on Christianity, at least in American context? Absolutely.
Yeah, I would agree, Skyler. I would say you don't have to be a Christian to believe in the fundamental beliefs. You don't have to be a Christian to believe in limited government. You don't have to be a Christian to believe our rights come from God. But these are core values. And if you don't accept our rights come from God, then the entire American equation is rewritten. Where do they come from? Does it come from the state? So if the state takes away your right that they gives you, does it come from the king? This is a very revolutionary idea. And so it's the influence of these Christian ideas that came in that gave us the foundation for the country. And we're based on these ideas. Now we've changed. I mean, we could spend hours on how much we've changed, whether it's better or worse, and gone throughout the 200 years of our history. However, the fundamentals should remain the same. And if you start changing the fundamentals, you'll change the entire country. And so we can debate what the fundamentals mean. We can debate how to apply them. But I think America is based on these fundamental core beliefs, which come from what I believe the Christian worldview of the founders. And it would have been different had they not been Christians. It might have come out close to the same. But the fundamental core of the country is based on these ideas. And we can debate them and discuss them. But if we change them, we'll change America. And in that sense, I think it's safe to say this country is founded on those beliefs in a Christian worldview. Universality, in my mind, simply means that all of you, no matter what you believe in, can come and enjoy the liberties of America. But if we start changing these core ideas, that government should be limited, that people should be free, that liberty is important, that God is the source of our rights, then we're going to change America, and it won't be for the better.
I would want I second to that, and also from like a very kind of like personal experience, I do feel that, for example, like the founders, like the people, like the initiators, like the very first people who are like founding like an organization or whatsoever, like they need to have this vision and they need to have this like very firm belief that something would work, and they're hold on to it. So later on, when newcomers they join, they not necessarily know like all the heritage, like all the history of like the very first founding story of like why this organization is founded, but like the most kind of like basic, or what keeps like the system, or kind of like an organization working basically, is that people know like a set of rules like or policies they need to kind of like be aware of and also follow in order to keep like people's like communication to be smooth, keep like kind of like the organization to run as is intended. So like not necessarily everybody would know like, hey, for example, like the Google founder, like they like people know like what is like the original idea or ideology like the Google founder like has been envisioned while they start to found Google, but they know like, okay, so the Google's like slogans like do not do evil things, and people say, okay, as long as I know I don't need to do evil things, not necessarily I don't know like, for example, like what like the great ideal like the Google founder like they themselves envision themselves to become. So this sort of like 2 cents from my perspective. And thank you so much, like Skyler and Kirby. Like, would you guys be okay with us quickly moving to like the shared picture that I shared to everyone?
Well, actually, I've got to run. I've got to cut out now. So I'll just say this. Number one, I want to thank all of you. Really intelligent questions. This is a great group. I hope you continue this. Hope I get invited back, because there's so much we could talk about. And I've enjoyed intelligent civil discussion, which you don't always get in America nowadays. So thank you for that. And you can give out my email, which is just my name, Kirby Wilbur @Hotmail. Anybody has any questions, any follow-up, I'd love to continue this with all of you in what time I've got. So again, I want to thank you for inviting me. And Skyler, thanks for helping me get everything set up. I'm not exactly a technical genius on this, but
absolutely, it's my pleasure.
Great questions and great discussion. So thank you for that. And continue. I've got some family obligations I got to go to. All right.
Thank you so much. And I would also share your email with people who like they would want to ask questions. Possibly we will also like gather like a list of questions. And if you have some like books that talks about civilization, about kind of like how people could kind of like embrace like hold these type of core values, like it would be also an honor that like you could share with us some of like the book list, because in our group people really love reading and they love like learning new things. And
I'll send you a list. I'll send you a list of a couple books I'd recommend reading for clarification, some of the points Skyler and I talked about today. All right.
Awesome.
Thank you. I'll send it out to anybody who wants them. You send me an email and I'll get them to you. All right.
We usually do this to show our appreciation to our presenters. Like we cannot meet like actually, but we use like this type of verbal cues for.
Well, I appreciate you guys too, because it was a great conversation. We should have more of this in this country. All right.
Seriously.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. If I can get out of this.
Thank you.
Okay. So like we have, let us check on time. So we have like the rest of our 20 minutes to have like a slightly kind of like lightened, like more relaxing conversation, and also have more of our group members to discuss about their own personal experiences. So like I know like some of us are being like very spiritual and also like reading books about spirituality, and some of us like start to kind of like do meditation practices and start to like be able to talk with our inner minds about like to increase our like kind of self-awareness and also like our observation about what is going on in our inside. So I would love to like introduce Jane, like to give us a quick kind of sharing, or like let us know like one like mindful like moment that you have been experienced. So Jane, if you are still there, would you like to let us kind of talk to us?
Oh, free discussion time?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Tim. I think I wasn't there in the first half an hour. and I consider myself a Christian. Let me just talk about like how I first knew Jesus. My family used to live in a community where there was a church, and it was a very rare thing in China. And I, like, every day after school, on the way back home, I walk by this church, and I definitely can notice the differences of this church building with other buildings around the church. But I don't remember anything from the area. So this is my first this is the first time I realized that there was a church and it's a different place for people. And my next is like when I went to the junior high school, my Chinese teacher was a Christian. And from what I recall today, she alluded to preaching of Jesus and other apostles a lot during the class. And I think those stories were fascinating. And it was the first time I think I was aware of Christianity. And then in the next 3 years, I began I would say intensive reading. I read a lot of books, not Bible, but books about Christianity, studies on Christianity. And I think at the time, like 10 or 20 years ago, I would say that politically, neoconservative were pretty popular. So I think I read a lot about like Christianity at the time because of that movement. And then I went to America for college. I went to church a lot, like every Friday for a fellowship program, and every Sunday I went to church for activities like preaching of the to have like at least church activities. I couldn't guarantee I went to the morning preaching part like every weekend, every Sunday, but at least I went to the activities afterwards. Yeah, that is my story about like how I like knew about Christianity.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Tim. So for me, I was actually talking to my Christian friend. His name is Qi, and it was also so he's my high school classmate, and he became a Christian after he around the last year in high school and first year in college, and he had his education in Tsinghua University, and now he is a PhD student in Boston. So basically what he told me is that when he felt really stressed and he didn't know the ultimate question that where people would end up with after they die, and he was so concerned and he was so troubled by this question. Then he started to read books, and combined with his own experience, he started to really feel that he could his spirit could be guided, and that made him to be kind of to appreciate and start to become a self-taught Christian, and now he goes to the church regularly. So what he shared with me is that it actually combines with a lot about what we actually learn in psychology, even we are atheists. So when we have a belief that even though we are not sure it happens, but if we don't use our energy or attention to spend on doubting ourselves, we know that we are heading to the good direction, and we have faith in that. That actually makes what what becomes successful. So like I would also so that's sort of like the story that I would like to share from my friend, because he like this morning, like this Sunday morning, he's going to the church to pray, so he is like not able to attend, unfortunately. Like we are Sunday morning meetings, and so is another Christian friend, like he's my college classmate, and he couldn't make it. He's currently in Chicago, and he couldn't make it also because of our very strange and awkward scheduled Sunday morning time. So these are like the two stories I would like to share on behalf of my friend. I was wondering like if Jane like started to have access to his to her speaker, because we tried and it failed just now.
Hi, I hope you guys can hear me. This is Jane. Sorry, I was on mute earlier. So just to talk a little about myself, I don't consider myself religious at all. And in fact, I think first semester of college, I went into a philosophy class and had this debate with my professor about what atheism really means. So I was asking a naive question, you know, so does it mean that somebody believes that there is a zero probability for a God to exist? So is that what, you know, defines an atheist? And then we had a heated debate on that, and he wasn't able to convince me. I wasn't able to convince him. So I think I'm still trying to learn more about, you know, religion overall. And then recently, because of COVID-19, I found myself in kind of a socially isolated situation. I believe a lot of you are experiencing, you know, similar sentiments. And one approach I tried and was really successful in terms of coping with, you know, feeling isolated and maybe even depressed is meditation. And through meditation, I found all of peace and in general a guided sense of motivation. And I think that's something that's really valuable, and I really appreciate the opportunity here to share my thoughts with you on meditation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. And I think I cut like Young short just now. Like Young, if you are still there, like what is sort of like your like meditative experience, or anybody could just jump in and like share some of like your mindful moment and see like and we could sort of like exchange how people would like interpret these messages differently.
I use meditation frequently personally. I highly recommend it. It helps me gain clarity on problems I'm solving. And also when I've been doing a lot of problem solving, like for work, I'll do a little meditation to kind of reset my brain and get it back into gear.
So
it's a really good practice.
So when you meditate, or like would you sort of like would you also take time when to consciously kind of like talk with your inner self? And during that type of like conversation, I know it can be like very private. I'm not like having any intention to like intrude that privateness, but like would you like frame that like to think how God would talk to you, or it would be mostly sort of like a self-motivating thing that, hey, I need to get this work done because I want to actualize like my goal or whatsoever?
I don't want to monopolize the time because I want to hear other people's answers to this, but I guess I see many types of meditation. I use different ones for different things. Some of it is relaxation technique. Some of it is specifically for reactivating brain chemistry or resetting brain chemistry. That's a scientific method. Some of it is for sleeping better. Some of it for me is for communing with God, to see what's really, I guess you would call it that conversation with your inner self. It's to find out what's really happening inside of me at a very deep level. And for me, often that also includes then going to God with it and communing with him, which is a very private and difficult to define experience, but very fruitful. I guess that's my experience.
That's awesome. So I'm just like randomly calling on people because you guys haven't talked, and I would want to give an opportunity for everybody to talk. And like Ruhan, are you currently there? And if so, like would you like to share like some of the personal like moments with us? Okay, so if Ruhan is not here, like next on my list is Ming. Okay, I'm not sure, like they are not unmuting, so maybe like they are like not there, but like hi, like I saw like you on like you showed like the video, like maybe like you'd like to share something with us.
No, actually, I'm eating, so I mute. Okay. For meditation, I think it's a very good practice in order to clear your mind, because like in nowadays people are more like head are stuck in like stuck like a bunch of information, like so it's very busy. And actually I read an article, like the medical study say that every day you have at least 10 minutes of meditation that relax your mind. It will like what to say, like re-energize your energy, or it's like a recharging, like it's a spiritual recharging, and not just spiritual, it's a like make you relax to prepare more difficulty that you are facing, like because like the human being nowadays facing many difficulties, and that I believe it's a fact that we have to face. So so it's very important for us to relax a couple minutes a day, and then the relax. What I mean is not doing something relaxed, not just like a reading book, not listen music. I mean like put your brain empty. Don't think about anything. That's a very important practice, because that's the thing we are missing a lot today.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think like at least in my previous education, we didn't really have a chance that we were taught to like take time for ourselves and start to be reflective and start to like listen to whatever like the emotions or thoughts start to come up. We like, but like the sad thing is that the more we try to suppress these feelings, like the more they would haunt us, like in like different situations of life. So that's how like we like I don't know if I cannot speak for other people, but this is how I personally start to like get more kind of practices, or kind of like get into the realm of like start like with like a meditation, and start with like having this like building up this curiosity about like the spirituality, and also like with different like religions, because I see how kind of like beliefs would actually do for people, like in the saddest or the most adversarial moments. Like it's usually like these things, like what you believe in the goodness, like what would be kind of like the good thing would happen, and this is just this is very temporary. So if you really ingrainedly believe that, that makes a lot of things much easier and better.
I would just like to comment on that. I think mindfulness and practicing the meditation is a great way to find out about not just yourself, but also it's a great way to handle interpersonal relationships. I have a career mentor, I think he's in his 50s, but he actually recommended meditation as a way to resolve interpersonal conflicts, because at the heat of the moment, you might very easily say things that you'll later regret. And going into a state of mindfulness allows you to reflect on your personal values and whether, you know, lashing out on somebody is the way you want to treat someone. And I think that's, you know, taking a step back and then having a moment of peace and calmness actually allows you to deal with the situations at hand a lot better.
Wow. So like in those times, like would you like do the meditation yourself, or you would also invite your partner to do the meditation with you? Like, I'm not if that is the thing.
I think that's actually a thing. I just haven't done it. I mean, we've done, so me and my partner, we've done meditations together next to each other, but with no communication. It's like which just happened to be in the same room and meditating together. So if anyone has like any experience doing meditation as a group, or just more than one person, it'd be great to share.
Oh yeah, like I know that there's a group like meditation, like that app is called
Headspace.
Headspace. Yeah,
Yep.
like they have like this continuous like a group meditation where you can just like chipping and then do the meditation with like people all over the world together. There are like guided, like instructed meditation.
Mm-hmm. And I actually do practice a lot of meditation with one of my friends. She's currently living in Sweden, and she's the one that introduced me to that app. And we've been practicing for me every day or every other day at 8 in the morning, and for her it's like 3 p.m. Yeah, it's just about 10 to 30 minutes of depending on how long we want to practice it for. But one of the main things that it does encourage you, or at least the way that they approach meditation, is that it is a way for you to acknowledge the feelings or the thoughts that you have, rather than just bottling them up. You just let them pass through your mind, just let them go as you take each and every breath. So to me, it's a very simplistic way to kind of symbolize that spirituality, or at least that way of pretty much getting everything within your mind, like getting things in order, seeing, reflecting what you have, what you don't have, etc., and then just letting it pass by as time goes. And that's one of the things that I feel that is very wonderful about that particular app. I really haven't practiced that much with other groups other than with my friend. But the other cool thing about that app is that sometimes if you miss a session or your friend misses a session, you can always just nudge them with really cute messages. You can tell them like, you deserve some headspace, or sending some love to you, like little things like that. And I think that is very encouraging to have pretty much a group. Like meditation, in the end of the day, is something that you partake yourself, but having a group that can pretty much give you that support, I think that is just kind of like a helpful way. It's not necessary, because again, it's something very individual. Or at least meditation is individual, because everyone has their own worries, everyone has their own thoughts, everyone has their own feelings. But having something or someone or some people to pretty much get you through it makes a difference, or at least feels like it does make a difference.
I agree. I kind of feel like it's like a channel that we allow like ourselves to have a conversation with what we like, what our feelings or emotions or thoughts are saying. Like for Skyler or Heather, like for like in China, like there are also like the people start to take lessons, and there are more and more like popular lessons teaching about meditation. Is Heather? Is Heather also there?
Yeah, I'm here. Hello.
Oh, hi, Heather. That's an unexpected surprise.
I've been just listening the whole time.
Oh my God, thanks. Yep. So like there we start like many of my friends, like they're back in mainland China, they start to take the courses about meditation, and they start to read books about spirituality, which that were uncommon like like pretty uncommon in the past, is like a new trend in China right now. Okay, so I think like we're almost about time. So like, so Skyler, thank you so much for these like slides. I find that to be very helpful. And like while you were talking, I also like take screenshots and send like those like key points to our group for like kind of like learning purposes.
Yeah, absolutely. Wikipedia is your friend. I have to go get ready for another meeting, but I can't tell you guys how much I enjoyed this.
Likewise.
Please feel free to reach out and schedule time to have some really interesting philosophical talks. Like I said, I like to be challenged as well. So
Awesome. Thank
bye,
you.
everybody.
So like if you guys can kind of like pull up the hand, and this is our like virtual way to show appreciation to Skyler. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's an honor for you to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll talk soon. Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, okay. So I think like, can I switch to Chinese very quickly?
You go ahead.
Okay. 大家这周怎么样? How's everybody? Okay, so like I think like I have some like the last like kind of like notes that we are going to like to share with the group. So basically one thing is that I'm talking with Mingyue about kind of like organizing like kind of like a short series like 人类学 how to translate
anthropology
subjects, and we are gathering ideas on like the key kind of the keywords for this series, so that Mingyue can help like organize and invite presenters within this like specific domain to join us and like discuss with us, and also like if like anybody like of like your friends would love to kind of join the discussion group, like we have this link. I think Mingyue also has it, so like feel free to use like this link to invite people to interested people to join our group. And so is like we also would like need like some like volunteers to help us with the organizational work. It can be challenging, and it also can be a very fruitful experience because you will learn and interact with people so much within this period. So in terms of like what we're going to have for people like for this session, I would gather the presenter's email and also like a list of book references and share with you guys, and I will also share with Mingyue, so Mingyue can put together like the Medium article to publish for everybody's discretion. And for next week, we are going to like, it would be the first week of August. Woo! Like so it like for this week, Jerry Wong, he's right now in China, but is in his kind of like 隔离期, so he would do like a little bit of like 就是 then he will sleep in the day and wake up at night and give us a presentation about like how technology would influence or impact like our kind of like humanities or our societies. He would approach it from like a theoretical perspective. He would draw like the notes from like the book of 人类简史, and then we can have a discussion to really have a chance to critically look at how technology has been changing our world.
By the way, are there any specific branches of anthropology you'd like us to get people from? So, like are you in particularly interested in people who are more into like biological anthropology or cultural or language?
I think like while my discussion with Mingyue, like these are all open, but we just need to find kind of like a coherent or kind of like way. So I think like we can have that to be discussed in the Leeds meeting, kind of Leeds Sync meeting, like this coming Tuesday night, and we can kind of like have a discussion to help you put together.
And it does help, especially because I know people that might be interested in at least providing some information, not necessarily presenting, but at least providing something. Because I have friends who do a lot of linguistical anthropology.
Ooh, that's cool.
But yeah, like if you guys want to pretty much focus the mini series on something a little bit more like a particular branch or being more general, do let me know so I can properly reach out to this person.
That's awesome. So Mia, you can like connect with Adrian on like many of these topics, and also at the same time, like there's a friend Eagle. I think she was invited by Tim. She joined us with like a huge love for like the continental philosophy, meaning that like the discussion of different concepts, like abstract concepts. For example, like the time, like about like how like Kant would interpret with I don't know some of like its English translations, but she's also like would help with organizing like finding kind of like a series of topics that is related to philosophy, and find kind of like presenters who are willing to come here to like discuss with us. And I really encourage people like or our friends in the like in the discussion group to be kind of like sharing some of our thoughts so that we can have a more coherent discussion afterwards. So like if you guys have any kind of like philosophical like kind of questions or kind of good ideas, feel free to reach out to her like in the WeChat group, or just reach out to me so I can have you guys connected. Yep, I think I'm almost like already like 1 more minute past our deadline. So how about like let's give everybody like a round of applause by showing our hands. And thank you so much for this week. And we are looking to connect with everybody for the following week. Thank you. 周日快乐，拜拜。
有。
拜拜。
拜拜。